There's also several other big reform ideas that we wanted to talk with you all about today. Clearly, governance is a huge issue in many of the schools that we are concerned about in some of our more rural areas. I think of Allendale and some of the other schools. And so when you're talking about not just funding, but the governance issue, clearly there are some things that we need to address there. And so today we're very pleased to have with us Elliot Smallie, who is currently the Chief of Staff of Tennessee's Achievement School District, but he has roots in South Carolina, having worked in the Charleston County School District as the Deputy Strategic Planning and Communications Director. He's also worked at the U.S. Department of Education, and he holds his master's degree from Cincinnati and did his undergrad at the University of Massachusetts. I was really grabbed by a quote that I saw in one of his biographies. I hope you don't mind if I read it to you. He said, "I grew up witnessing education inequities all across the South, and now I wake up every day with a sense of urgency around closing the achievement gap. I think we're at an opportune time in public education. We are beginning to learn what really works, but the task of moving entrenched bureaucracies to adopt proven strategies, innovate, and gauge success based on student results versus adult accomplishments or levels of activity is Herculean. I believe that if we're going to fix public education on a grand scale, we have to start with an unshakable belief in the limitless potential of every child." And I really couldn't sum up any better than that, what we're talking about here today. So with that, Elliot, welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Let's see if I can, this thing, just click on the right.
I can advance for you.
Okay, cool. Thanks for that introduction. I don't get to break this tie out very often in Tennessee. I haven't gotten used to that Tennessee orange yet, but I'll bring it out when I'm in my native South Carolina for sure, and I wear it proudly. Good? Okay, so if I leave you with nothing else today, because I'm sure you guys, you hear a lot, you go to committee meetings, you go to luncheons, there's a lot of inputs. I want you to hear that Tennessee responded to a sense of urgency. That sense of urgency was clear. And they basically asked themselves, are we doing all right? Is this good enough? And they came to the conclusion, no, we can do a lot better. And they did something about it. They did a range of things. One of those things is the ASD. I'm going to talk to you about the ASD today. So why this happened in Tennessee, when it happened, what's been done since, what are our core beliefs? He kind of stole basically our theory of action. Give great people the resources and autonomy to do great things for kids. They know their kids the best, and our whole system is predicated on this belief that schools are going to get better faster if they have the power to meet their kids' needs, not a central office that's located miles down the road, but the schools themselves. That is our big belief, and that's what we're really betting the farm on in Tennessee. So when Tennessee first ran this list, it was actually back in 2010 that a Democratic governor, Phil Bredesen, and the legislature were taking a look at this thing. And they put a piece of legislation forward called First to the Top. They wanted to be the fastest growing state in the country. And they had seen a couple things. They'd seen, one, that they changed their standards. They made their state standards much more rigorous. And in the span of just 1 year, proficiency rates dropped by 30 and 40 points for kids and families. So the kids and families were kind of playing by a set of rules. They changed the standards. All of a sudden, the next year, kids and families were being told, you're not proficient. But it was the truth. It was ugly truth. And it was the truth that the state responded to. So they ran the list of schools that are in the bottom 5%, which in Tennessee they define basically using a grade 3 through 8 test, kind of like the PASS here in South Carolina. It's called the TCAP in Tennessee. And in high schools, they also include the graduation rate. So what schools are in the bottom 5%? Well, 30,000 kids were in those schools. There are about 85 schools in the bottom 5%. Fewer than 1 in 6 could read and do math on grade level. Fewer than 1 in 6 kids in these 85 schools, 30,000 kids with the same exact potential that my 3 kids have, likely absent the privilege that my 3 kids have, to have a mom who went to Johns Hopkins, was a public school teacher in Montgomery County, basically teaches my kids at home, plus they go to a great public school. Kids who have the exact same potential, but fewer than 1 in 6 could read and do math. ACT scores. That's another thing that the state looks at because it's something that kids all across the country take. We don't want to get into Common Core today. I'm here to talk about the ASD, but you've got some benchmarks. You've got the NAEP and you've got ACT, and there are a few measures where you can say, how are our kids doing? Well, 4% of the high schoolers and the bottom 5% schools in Tennessee were college ready, according to ACT. 4% got a 21 or higher. This is the basic distribution in the schools. They're spread throughout the state, but they're really located in some of the state's urban centers. There are some rural schools on this list as well. We took a look at this and saw Memphis, a city that's got one of the highest poverty rates in the entire country, one of the highest crime rates in the entire country. A lot of priority schools in Memphis, handful in Nashville. This is the current list. This list gets rerun every 3 years, but this is kind of what it looks like across the state. So the state said, what are we going to do about it? And one thing that they really focused on that I'm not an expert in, Tennessee policy on this, but they've done a lot around teacher quality, teacher support, teacher effectiveness. Tennessee was kind of in that game years ago, looking at how they do tie teacher development to student outcomes. And I can't say enough about the great work that the State Department of Ed does and the legislature has done to support that work. But they said, look, we got to do something about our chronically low-performing schools. We got to do something about fewer than 1 in 6 kids reading in this many schools with this many kids. So we're going to create a statewide school district. It's going to be a public school district. It will have the authority to select and partner with any of these schools and run them. It will have the authority to authorize charters. But this is kind of a new notion of charters. It's kind of a charters 2.0, because in the ASD, if we bring a public charter operator in to run a school, number one, it has to be not-for-profit by law. So we have no for-profit charters in Tennessee in the ASD. They're all not-for-profits. And number two, the charter's got to serve the same kids. So you go into a school and you've got a neighborhood zone where 32% of your kids might have IEPs, right? 96% of the kids we serve are African American. 96% of them qualify for free and reduced lunch. We have to serve the same kids. And in fact, that's not seen as a burden to us. We take great pride in serving these amazing kids. But our charters partner with the neighborhood school and they stay neighborhood schools. And we set a goal. We said, we don't want to just move schools off a list. So we don't want to say like, okay, we're going to succeed, pack up our bags if we move schools from the bottom 5% to the bottom 6%, or from an F to a D, depending, you can look at different ways in which states define schools that are underperforming. So we said, we believe we can move our schools to the top 25% in the state. We believe that if we take the existing resources, not add to them, it's not how much, but it's really how, it's how they're used, flow them to the schools, those schools will get better. And the kids are just as capable as any other kid of performing in the top quartile. So that's the big goal that we set. And this is really what it comes down to. We believe kind of in these 4 freedoms. We believe that if you start with great talent, and we can talk about the talent cultivation in Tennessee, talent pipelines, big changes that have come. But if you're relentless about putting great people who are highly skilled and believe in every child, know how to build a school culture, know how to teach, especially kids who are far behind, and you give them the freedom over their time, so how they set their schedule, maybe they want to extend the day 4 days out of the week. Maybe they want to have a collaboration day for teachers in their network every Wednesday. We believe that the schools should decide that, either individually or with their own networks. Same goes with their budget, same goes with their people. So this is really the heart and soul of our theory of action, that if we give schools these freedoms, they're going to get better. And we hold them accountable for that top 25% goal. So this is kind of a simple breakdown of our roles. As an authorizer on the left-hand side, we've designed our own authorization process, so we want to make sure we've got, the best charter operators locally in the country. We've got an incredibly high bar, very objective. It's pretty ruthless. If you want to come to the ASD and serve our kids, then you need to be really, really good. You either need to have a proven track record as a charter operator, or you need to have a proven track record as educators. So we have some folks who have never run a charter, but they were a successful principal. They've got a group of successful teachers, and they want to open up a charter because they're really compelled to do this work. So on the left side, you kind of see how we act as an authorizer. One thing that we do is when charters come into the ASD, we don't guarantee them a school. They propose to us joining the ASD, and they'll tell us we think we're capable of growing to 6 schools or 10 schools over X amount of years. But we don't say, okay, as soon as you come in, we're going to pair you with this neighborhood school, you're going to run this school. We have a matching process where we spend months engaging the community, and we actually go out into the priority schools that are on the list, and we bring their parents out, their teachers out, and then we bring the charter operators and their teams out, and we spend months kind of playing this like Match.com role, where we convene, they learn about each other, and then we get a recommendation from the community about which charter operators should match with the priority schools. And then we make that decision in December, and then that charter spends the next 9 months knocking on doors, meeting parents, and getting ready for the school year. On the right-hand side, because the state created us as an LEA, and you could consider in South Carolina whether you want to do this. In some states like Louisiana, the charters are their own LEAs. So that happens in some states. Where we are, we're the LEA, so we're responsible for all the federal programs, compliance, special populations, special ed, making sure our families are getting what they need. So we've got a staff of people who are really working on that. So on the right-hand side, we're really talking about access for families, options for families, making sure that our kids are getting served. So in just a few short years, I would suggest that, a place like Memphis wasn't really on the map as a place that was really bringing people in or growing its own to do this kind of work. And so in just a few short years, we actually have 17 high-quality public charter operators authorized by the ASD to run up to 80 schools. Some of these are coming from places like California, but that cluster in the middle, those are all local people. Those are all local leaders who basically created their own charter networks and come in through the ASD and are now running neighborhood schools that are in the bottom 5%, all committed to moving them forward. So we kind of put out the bat signal in the sky, a bunch of people came, and we've got a great group of charter operators doing this work. We also run a few schools ourselves, so it's not a pure charter strategy. We have a network of schools that we directly manage. We hire the principals, we run the curriculum, so kind of a traditional LEA. So there's a small group of schools that we're running directly to. They get the same autonomies. They're treated as their own unit. This is probably the only slide that I have that specifically talks about funding, but I'm happy to answer questions about how we fund it. So since we were started in part through Race to the Top, we've been able to send 100% of our public funds, our state funds, to the schools. By law, our schools get the same per pupil as their home district. So if it's $9,000 in Memphis, they get $9,000 per kid. What's different is we're not slicing off the top 20 or 30%. That's actually 100% going to the schools. So that principal and that faculty and that group, they get to decide how to maximize that money, what they want to do with it, what their program is. Good to see you, sir. And they're committed to serving the highest need kids. So if I had more time, I'd tell you a lot about the community partnerships that we now have, which are incredibly exciting. But in terms of funding, this just kind of shows you on the left side, that's how much we give to our schools. And it's the same pot of money. We're not asking for more money from the state. We're not even a line item in the state budget, believe it or not. We give 100% of that BEP, that per pupil, to our schools. This just gives you a sense of our growth. There's some states that are kind of jumping right into this and taking on a whole bunch of schools at once. We really want to put quality over scale. So we came in, we spent about a year really tilling the soil, getting to know people, knocking on doors, meeting with pastors, really understanding the communities in which these priority schools had been for a long time. And we started with 6 schools, 5 in Memphis, 1 in Nashville. And that was our first year just 2 years ago. And you can see this year it's 23, next year we're going to have 30. So up to serving 10,000 kids. But we didn't come in and say we're going to serve all 30,000 kids at once. We got people who want to do it. We're just going to try to run them. Frankly, we didn't want to become the bureaucracy that we were designed to replace. And we never want to become that bureaucracy. I want to say a couple things about engagement and then talk to you about the impact and the results. This is one of the keys for us. We put a lot of just heart, soul, grit, energy into this. We have a lot of fun with families. Every single one of our schools is getting out in the spring before the next school year even starts and is knocking on doors. We believe in relational home visits, going to the parents where they are. We have sessions with parents where we say, well, what do you like at the school? What would you want to keep? What would you want to start? What would you want to stop? And so all of our schools kind of work this visioning with their communities before we ever get started. And I have to tell you, the parents are surprised to see us knocking on their doors in February, talking about the next school year. But we believe we got to really dig in around a broader culture change, or this thing won't have the ripple effects that we really want it to. This is a photo from a big event we just had recently. If you go to our website, you're not going to see a lot of stuff about policy. You're going to see videos where kids are talking about the changes, that they were in the school 2 years ago when it was run by the local district. Now it's an ASD school. Here's how it's better. You're going to hear from parents. You're going to hear from our teachers who are teaching with us and love the freedom that they have, together with the accountability, because they were always doing that in their classroom anyway, and now they've got this whole kind of esprit de corps throughout the ASD, and they feel like they're a part of this team that's doing something truly aspirational. So I see a lot of photos like this. Encourage you to go to our website. You may not get a ton of the policy stuff, but you see a lot of that. So what's the impact then? I want to talk about some really important sort of ecosystem landscape pieces, and then talk about results for Tennessee. So the teachers aren't the problem. The teachers are the solution. And we really start with talent. My first interview with Chris Barbick, our superintendent, he said, we're betting the farm on people. We're going to start with great people. We're going to do whatever we can to get great people in schools, and then give them the power to unleash results. And if you dial back the clock, this is in Memphis, there were a handful of employers and a handful of teacher programs. If you're a great teacher, you'd start with one HR office. You know, if you want to get a job as a teacher, you'd start with one. This is what that looks like today. There's actually I don't know if the press release is going out today or tomorrow, but there's one of the best teacher prep programs in the country is called Relay. They're partnering with the University of Memphis, and they're going to open up launch a new teacher prep program in Memphis. If you Google Teacher Town USA, the entire first page is stories about Memphis, all 10 articles. Because Memphis has truly become the place where teachers want to go if they want to make an impact. And it's not just us, it's us working in partnership with the local district, community partners, to make it so that you've got the world in your hands if you teach in Memphis. You are one of the most in-demand professions, and it's pretty incredible to witness. So these are organizations that are all about supporting or hiring teachers, all of them in Memphis.
Elliot, can you give them a 30-second blurb on how they're paying for their teachers? So the teacher salaries are significantly higher in Memphis too, correct?
In Memphis, as a district?
Or I thought the average salary, they had bumped.
Our salaries probably on average are similar. I think what you would see is our networks will pay teachers for results and taking leadership opportunities sooner. So the way the money is spread out is different. I'm glad you asked that question. So like in our network of schools, the teachers got together with the administration and they spent a few months actually designing their teacher compensation program. It came from the teachers. So they decided that if you're a first-year teacher, you get great results. Okay, if you go 5 years, you get great results, you take on leadership opportunities, you can make over $90,000 in our schools. And Green Dot's got its own pay scale too. Right. But we're not paying a ton of money to ineffective teachers year after year after year, so it kind of balances out. So the Center for Reinventing Public Education does this annual study on portfolio-style districts that give autonomies to schools. You can see there's a long list. Some of these are traditional districts who are taking this approach. And this was their last study. So you see that green bar. If you're green, they consider you an exemplar in all of these areas. Basically, they think, they've got these 7 components, and they rate districts on each of them. So we feel good that they see us as an exemplar in every one of these conditions. However, it's really early. We want to see the results. Let's see how the conditions actually translate over time. So this year, our students made some pretty slight proficiency gains. If you take all of our schools together, some were first-year schools. We had 16 schools just get started, so we're doing a lot of culture building. Relative to the state, these are pure proficiency gains. It's not a percentage increase, so about 3.5 points in reading in a year where state peers actually went backwards. Our high school students had 30, 40, 20-point gains. And so the green bars are our high school students' proficiency gains compared to their peers across the state this past year. Well, let me go back. Another tip, another just ASD stat. So this list just got rerun. The priority list was run 3 years ago. When the list got rerun, there's always going to be a bottom 5% in every state, right? I mean, there's a bottom 5%. What we want to see is we want to see the threshold for the bottom 5% get higher and higher and higher. So this year, it grew by 6 proficiency points. So that slide that I showed you that said fewer than 1 in 6 kids reading below grade level, that was when the list was first run. Now that's fewer than 1 in 4. So wholly unacceptable. However, if you look at the priority schools, they are, as a group, they're getting better. They're growing faster. It's like harder to get out of the priority school group now because the overall proficiency rate is going up. There are 4,500 fewer kids in Memphis now zoned to priority schools in just 3 years. And a lot of that is what the district's doing and what we're doing, but it's a big difference. So the last two on results that I think are really important, if you look at the states that actually have at least 90% of their kids taking the ACT, Tennessee was tied for first and fastest growing this year. Actually, a 1/10 of a point on the ACT is considered statistically significant. So Tennessee was right there at the top on the ACT. The bigger story that became national this year is NAEP. I mean, NAEP is given every 2 years. It's given to 4th and 8th graders. It's also given to 12th graders. This year, Tennessee kids absolutely dwarfed every other state in the country in growth on NAEP, taking the same test at the same standard. Tennessee, if you put the tests together, had a combined 22-point gain on NAEP this year. In fact, it was the most growth by any state in the last 10 years of administering NAEP. And that's a goal that the state set, was that it would become the fastest growing, using NAEP as one of those measures. So huge gains for 4th and 8th graders in our state. That's it. Quick story of the ASD. Yes, sir.
What happens when, after the 3-year cycle in a school tests out of the bottom? What happens?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So we actually have about half of our schools right now who are eligible. Some are new. We actually have launched some new alternative schools that they're not eligible yet because they don't have enough years in. Out of the 12 schools in the ASD that are eligible to kind of test out of the priority list, 5 out of 12 in just 2 years are already testing out of the priority list. They stay in the ASD right now by law. Technically, when we charter a school, it's a 10-year charter, and that's consistent with state law. So if you look at a local authorizer, a board that authorizes charters, they're 10 years in Tennessee. We wanted to basically follow form there, or I should say the legislature did. However, we're talking to local districts about changing that. If they feel like it's a good idea, if the charter operator, if the school community in the district, if the school moves out of the bottom 5% and is doing really well after a few years, we're open to talking about, hey, maybe it returns back to the district. The way the law was written, the Commissioner of Education basically has the authority, and it's a combination of that and looking at the readiness of the district to receive that school back. And then the schools we run directly are a little different. In 5 years' time, if they're doing well, the parents can vote. So actually the parents in the schools can say, I think it's like 60%, can say, we want the school to go back to the local district, or they can say, we want the school to stay in the ASD. So that's kind of how that works.
Any other questions?
Anything else? All right, I'll be hanging out in the back if you guys want to come find me. Thanks.
Thank you.